The outside of the shop has just been finished. That night the backhoe breaks down and Rob doesn't have a lot of confidence that he can fix it because he's never worked on a backhoe before. Mother Nature decides to take this time to dump some more of that white stuff on us. Rob has to work in a shop that is muddy, wet, and cold. We had thought by now we would be working on insulating the inside of the shop, but that's not how things worked out.
After a little investigative work and having the John Deere mechanic stop by, I didn't have any forward gear, or not much. So we checked the fluid and it was burnt. So they figured the torque converter and the reverser, which is just a forward and reverse, hydraulically run, was out of the tractor. He said it would be about $3,000 from them to get a torque converter, and they couldn't get the reverser, so they would have to rebuild it. But he gave me a number of an outfit out of Texas, and they said that they had one in stock on the shelf. The torque converter and the reverser would be just shy of $3,200 for both, and they would take care of that's exchange, and they would take care of shipping the old one back. So we went ahead and had them ship it up. I don't remember exactly. I think it was about 3 or 4 days. So while that was happening, I pulled the other one out. Yeah, all this wasn't as bad as I thought it was, because I first had trouble. I envisioned it being connected to the transmission and having to pull the cab off and break the tractor in two, but the torque converter is just a little box about a foot square that is attached to the bell housing behind the engine. And in order to get it out, I just had to pull the drive line between the reverser and the transmission, which is about 16 inches long. Pull the front drive line off the transfer case to the front end to make room. And there was several hoses, 6 bolts. Pulled the reverser off of the bell housing, and then there was only 4 bolts, I believe, that held the bell housing onto the engine. But I had to chain the engine up because the rear mounts for the engine are on the bell housing. So in order to get it out, I had to just take it apart and have something hold the engine up. And then once the bell housing was out, why, there was just 5 or 6 bolts, and then the torque converter came off. With the torque converter out, why, the next steps were cleanup and getting all the fittings that were needed off of the reverser to put on the rebuilt one when it got there, which I didn't know, so I basically left most of them so that I weren't taking off too much. They're having to send it back. The only thing I had to do for the torque converter was there is a metal plate that the torque converter bolts to, that bolts to the flywheel. And once that plate is bolted to the flywheel, then the torque converter turns whenever the engine spins. So it's solid to the engine. Okay, we had the old reverser out on the back of the shop truck, which we're using for a bench. We just have to take the pipe fittings and the reverse switch off to put on the new ones, and the electric solenoids for the forward and reverse. The block was a little different, so we'll have to do it. The new torque converter and reverser have come in, so now we're putting the pipes and fittings and the reverse switch onto the new one. This is the reverse switch, putting a little pipe dope on it. Hopefully it'll seal up. The hole that it goes in on top of the reverser was cut into the block at an angle. It's not going straight down, so as you can see, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting it started. They're 1/8 inch pipe threads, so I don't want to get it going crooked because there wouldn't be too much left to fix it. That switch runs basically the backup alarm is all it is. It tells when it's in reverse. And when I started putting the new reverser in, why, I broke one of the ears off of it. I tried soldering it back on, but evidently there was enough heat that it made it not work. So once I got the reverser put in and all ready to go and filled up with fluid, tractor wouldn't move, so I had to call and ask about the reverser to see that switch. They said either short the two wires across or pull one off. To get all the fittings put in, why, the next is the bell housing. Just to go in and be hooked to the engine, which I didn't get enough pictures of. And here we have the reverser is on the jack underneath the tractor. There just isn't enough room to be able to do much camera work and show anything. I'm cleaning off the end shafts. There are 3 shafts that have to be lined up in order to slide that in, and that gave me a little trouble. There's a piece on the torque converter that just has 2 ears, and it goes into a slot inside in which it will turn, so you have to have it lined up before you set it up there. The center shaft is splined in the reverser and will turn to fit into the torque converter, but the outside hollow shaft that the inner shaft sits in is also splined, and it is solid. The splines inside the torque converter need to turn in order to fit on that solid shaft. Sometimes you can shift the reverser a little bit from side to side to get it to go in, but they all 3 have to line up before it'll go in solid. And that's what gave me the trouble. I got to within about a 1/2 inch of having it go, and I just couldn't make it move. So like all other things that happen, I called a friend who's another mechanic, and on his way home he stopped by, and once we both got under there, why, it took about 30 seconds for it to shift and fall in. Transmission jack, as you can see in the picture, has a dial on the front and one on the side, so you can tip it either sideways or up and down with the front and back to help line it up, and it's almost always better off to have it perfectly lined up before you ever try and put it in, because otherwise you tend to have it fighting the rest of the way. Once the reverser was in place with Tommy's help, then there was just 6 bolts left to hook up, 3 or 4 hoses, and put the 2 drive lines back in, and then we're ready to go.
Rob came out of the shop with the backhoe with a great big smile on his face, and he and the backhoe quickly got busy pushing back the snow that he hadn't been able to with Fergie. Rob is going back to work because we don't want to dip into our savings any deeper. In our next video, Rob gives me a lesson in how to plow snow with the backhoe, so come back to see how that turns out. We hope the coronavirus has a short life. We especially want to thank those in the trenches who are helping those in need. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. See you next time. Blessings to all.